All right, class. So I know maybe we've already covered this, but I just want to do a recap because I'm not certain if the other class was able to cover this area. So real quick for a recap, aphasia and language. The reason why aphasia is being brought up is because damage to the left hemisphere in the particular areas, if that area is damaged due to any type of trauma, it can affect your language because different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions. So what aphasia is damage to any area in the left hemisphere. Okay, it can produce aphasia. Now you have two different types of aphasia, or two different areas as it lists here, but it also in research you'll find it listed as Broca's aphasia, Wernicke's aphasia, but here it's just talking about the area association. It's all the same thing. So Broca's aphasia, or damage to Broca's area, a person will struggle with speech production. So the person you can ask them questions, they can answer the questions correctly, but they will have trouble articulating the words. So it may come off as a stutter. It may take a long time for them to answer a fairly easy question, and it's because of the damage to that particular area. The aphasia you typically see in stroke victims. Wernicke's area or Wernicke's aphasia, the person is unable to understand the speech of others. I have a really great video, and I think I showed it in both classes, where the individual was asked a question, and here it states that the person is unable to understand the speech of others, and they also speak only in meaningless words. And the reason why they say these words are meaningless is because those words don't relate at all to the question that is being asked, or the conversation, or the context of the conversation. It's just like word salad. So I provided two videos on that just as a recap, but in the video, the gentleman that has damage to the Wernicke's area, or Wernicke's aphasia, seemed like he understood to a certain degree at the very beginning, but then he lost the concept of what the question was about. So I'll stick to this definition here because it's accurate. All right, here it's just showing you the areas in the left hemisphere where that damage has occurred. And so here, this is for Broca's, and here is for Wernicke's. Uh-oh, didn't mean to do that switch. All right. Moving on. Intelligence. Be familiar with intelligence, how it is defined. General intelligence, according to Spearman. And then we have the multiple intelligences, according to Gardner. And I'll show you here again. This is a recap because I'm fairly certain that we already went over this. But this is Gardner's 8 intelligences. And when you look back at Gardner's intelligences versus a general intelligence, according to Charles Spearman, is that all of our mental abilities are measured by every task on an intelligence test. It's like we have one intelligence. But when we look at general intelligence, it's almost like we have an intelligence in multiple areas, that we may be highly intelligent in one area, but may not be that intelligent in another. And to prove that point, you have an example of savant syndrome. And I showed a video in class of an individual that if that person was to take a intelligence test, they may score very, very low. I mean, almost to the point of like mental retardation. But that doesn't mean that person is a highly intelligent, where this one gentleman was taken on a helicopter ride, and he was mute for many years, taken on a helicopter ride as an adult, had a heightened intelligence, genius at drawing, on the helicopter for 30 minutes viewing New York, I believe, and was able to draw, including landmarks, the entire scope of what he saw from New York City in a helicopter in 30 minutes. I mean, from memory, drawing everything from memory. So that is a level of intelligence that we definitely have to be considerate of. And maybe it's not just one general intelligence. I like to lean to the side of where we do have multiple intelligences, because you have people that are experts in one particular thing, but just not so great at the other. Excuse me. We have the emotional intelligence. And just when I'm thinking about Gardner's multiple intelligences, it makes you think about like a person that may be in a therapeutic role where they have a heightened intelligence, a heightened sense, a heightened knowledge of emotional responses. And so therapists, those are people that are really good with that. Counselors, those are people that are really good with that are able to perceive and pick up on those things and understand and be able to analyze those things. So, it's something to be considered for sure. All right, here you see that this is just giving us a breakdown of the intelligence and assessments here. Good chart to look at. So you can just read over it. It'll definitely help you there. Now we're going to get to how we assess, how do we test, how do we measure intelligence. And so here we have the different assessing agents. So intelligence test, IQ test, that would be one. Assess mental aptitudes and compare them with those of others using numerical scores. All right, achievement test intended to reflect what is learned. Okay, and then aptitude test intended to predict ability to learn some new skill. So we've, over the course of time, we've most likely taken at least out of the three, at least two of these tests. When you're thinking about achievement tests, think about your benchmarks that children are given in school. Aptitude test, that may be a test that you took in high school to kind of see what career would be best for you based on how you responded to those questions. So those are tests that we're typically given often, or at least at one point in our life. So be familiar with those different types of assessing intelligence. All right. So continuing on with the IQ or intelligence test. This is how they test you. So your IQ is going to be determined by your mental age and your chronological age. Your chronological age is your exact age. Okay, like what your age is currently. Your mental age could be either greater or less. You'll see a person that has a mental age that is less than their actual chronological age due to it could be some type of developmental delay. And then they multiply that by 100 and you get what your IQ test is. IQ score. Now, with the IQ or intelligence test, you have some people that are not fans of this test because they don't feel like it may give a accurate depiction or description of a person's true intelligence. Because if you go back and look at a person that has savant syndrome, they may not do so well on this IQ test, okay? Because you have some that have, or many that have savant syndrome are autistic, but that doesn't mean. All right, let's move on to what do intelligence tests take? So we have the Wechsler. We have different types of intelligence test. Wechsler is going to focus on the overall intelligence score and separate the score based on verbal comprehension, your reasoning, your working memory, and processing speed. You have two different types. You have the one that's for adult intelligence, and then you have the one that is for children, the preschool version. And then it's broken down again into vocabulary, perceptual reasoning, and working memory. And so a lot of times you may see with the Wechsler test is that it may feel like it's the same question that's being asked over and over and over again. But that goes back to trying to kind of have a valid test and making sure that the person is answering the test correctly based on what the question was that was being answered. All right, with a test, when creating tests, good tests should have validity and should have where it's reliable, okay? Because otherwise, you're not giving a fair assessment, all right? So standardized test is three good types. Standardized, we've heard of standardized testing, okay? Reliable, and then valid. So let's look at the terms, or let me give you, because I don't think the slides, I don't think it breaks it down. No, it doesn't break it down. So I'm going to break it down for you. All right. Standardized is a uniform test. Okay. So it's a uniform testing procedure, and the scores are compared with the performance of a like group. Okay. That's standardized testing. Reliability, or a reliable test, is the extent to which a test yields consistent results, okay, and assessed by the consistency of scores on two halves of the test, all right? Or you can retest, and that test is still going to give you those results, okay, consistent results. And so that, therefore, you'll know if you have like a reliable product. Okay, so we've done consistent testing, and we tested the airbags on this car 100 times, and it's done the same thing over and over and over again. You're testing the reliability. Okay, so it's a valid, it's showing you the reliability of the results. It's good results, something you can stand firm on, because you're getting consistent results all the time. Okay, and then valid or validity, as you'll see it, is the extent to which a test measures or predicts what it's supposed to. Students, as a student myself, former student myself, especially undergrad, the frustration that students have had or have still currently, when you've taken a test and you feel like the test is not going over anything that it said that it was going to test, that would be an invalid test. So for instance, if I gave you a test and I told you all, hey, you're having a test on chapter 10, but yet only one question from chapter 10 is there, and then the rest of the questions are from chapter 9 and 8, that would be an invalid test, because I didn't test you on what I said I was going to test you on. And so that students really have a frustration with validity, rightfully so, because you're supposed to test on what you said you were going to test on, therefore you can get valid results. Excuse me. All right, these are just some giving you some background information about developmentally delayed intellectual disabilities, but it's all based on intelligence scores. It's also based on some other assessments that will give you some valid and reliable results that show that this person is consistently testing this way based on this particular score, this assessment, or what we were looking at through observation, because there's many different ways we can do assessments. And so this is here is showing you intelligence test score indicating performance in lowest 3% of general population, or about 70 or below, for a person that would be diagnosed with a intellectual disability. And of course, this would have to be a parent before the age of 18. High extreme, high score children, IQ over 135, high levels of education attained. Just FYI, just good information to kind of look over of how they assess intelligence test. Excuse me. Just some continued FYI information, how boys and girls perform in regard to their strengths and I'll say their strengths. I won't say their weaknesses, but I'll say their strengths and intelligence. As you can see, just for example, girls outspace boys in spelling, verbal fluency, reading. You know, a lot of that is gained from reading. Increased sensitivity to emotions, touch, taste, and color. Boys are, you know, the ones that are typically do well in math, spatial ability, low and high extremes. All right. Here, there used to be some real true issues, especially early in, I would say early in maybe the 50s and 60s and things of that nature, where what the test creators were doing. And I don't know if they were doing it purposefully or if they were doing it without really proper research and understanding, but they would create tests for children to take that were considered to be standardized tests. And they would ask the children questions that the children that were either lower socioeconomic status or African American couldn't answer because they weren't privy to some of those experiences. So, for example, it used to be a question on a standardized test for children that asked about what is it called? So the question was about a dumbwaiter, and it asked the African American children kind of like, well, not just the African American children, it was a question that all children had to answer about, kind of like what was the purpose of a dumbwaiter, or, when you do something on a place of food or something like that on a dumbwaiter, what happens? Or this is just me kind of constructing what it was, but what it was about was that the question included the term dumbwaiter. So you're talking to children that are from a low socioeconomic status. They don't have a dumbwaiter in their house. Okay. So they couldn't answer that question accurately because that wasn't based on their experience. That's an invalid, unreliable test, and it's a biased test. Okay. You can't ask a question like that because that doesn't appeal to everyone in that general population. That's an unfair test. So those children would get it wrong because these kids are probably thinking a dumbwaiter, a person that's dumb and waiting on the food. But no, it's like an elevator for food. And so they didn't have that in their house. But children that are higher socioeconomic status have a home that have that. Of course they could answer that question correctly because that was their experience. But it was unfair and biased to children that did not have that same experience. So when you are conducting tests, you have to be considerate of that. You have to be considerate of that as well, so that you're being culturally appropriate when you're asking certain questions. All right, and the last term I want you to be familiar with is going to, a last bit of information, not necessarily just the term, but the last piece of information I want you to be familiar with is going to be a stereotype threat, test taker's expectation right here. And stereotype threat is a self-confirming concern that one will be evaluated based on a negative stereotype. And so a study was done by Stephen Spencer and his colleagues in 1997 where women did not perform as well as men on difficult math tests unless they had been led to expect that women usually do well on that test. Because otherwise it's an intimidation based on just previous research and how it's been supported and how it's been kind of publicized that men are better in math. You just saw that boys do well in math, okay? And so that's a stereotype. It's not necessarily always true. It's just a stereotype, and that can be evolved because typically those results are from childhood. But you don't see people going back and doing an evaluation of once they become adults or once they go through puberty. Do those results change? We don't know that. So that's something to be considered as well. And another bias. Another study was done with Black students in 2002 that showed that they performed worse. Another study with Black students showed that they perform worse when reminded of their race before the test. Okay, because then they're considering and thinking, I'm going to be judged, or these results are going to be a result of good, bad, or indifferent because I'm African American. So those are some kind of issues when you are making exams, when you are assessing exams and tests and things like that, that you want to make sure you're giving the fairest, cleanest test that you possibly can so that you're yielding the results that are necessary. The last term that I want you all to be familiar with, and it should be somewhere in the text, In the textbook, I can't tell you exactly what page because I don't have the textbook with me. But Down syndrome is also a part of intelligence because it's an intellectual disability marked by a developmental condition that's apparent before age 18, sometimes with a known physical cause. And so be familiar with Down syndrome in addition to stereotype threat. And that concludes chapter 9.